My wife insisted we divide our joint business to unleash her full potential. 4 months later, she was shivering in a freezing storage facility while she had lost everything. The evening Isabel returned from her Elevate and Scale mastermind retreat in Austin, I had zero suspicion it would trigger the most chaotic business quarter of my life. I was in the kitchen, reheating leftover pasta, when the front door opened. She dragged her leather duffel across the hardwood, practically vibrating with an aggressive manic inspiration. She didn't even unpack. She just dropped her bag by the stairs, poured a heavy glass of Pinot, and sat at the kitchen island. She looked at me, not like a husband, and not even like a partner. She looked at me like a bottleneck she had finally figured out how to bypass. Every successful woman I met this weekend runs a solo operation, she announced. Her tone wasn't conversational. It was a boardroom declaration. We are stifling each other by co-managing the studio. I need absolute creative and operational autonomy to scale properly. For 6 years, we had run a highly profitable vintage furniture company. It wasn't a hobby, it was a machine. I am a supply chain specialist. I handled logistic, wholesale negotiations, warehouse management, and freight insurance. I made sure the trucks arrived, the import tariffs were paid, and the inventory wasn't rotting in a shipping container at the port of Seattle. Isabel was the aesthetic visionary. She managed curation, styled the floor, and built our massive social media footprint. We took home a combined $160,000 last year. We were thriving, but her pitch possessed a certain relentless, cold logic. 2 distinct brands, 2 separate revenue streams. She had spent 3 days listening to a keynote speaker named Odette Sorel tell her that shared equity was just a polite word for diluted ambition. All right, I agreed, leaning against the counter. We divide the current inventory and the vendor lists straight down the middle. We appraise the shared assets. She frowned. The wine glass stopped moving in her hand. I meant more like I take the high-end mid-century pieces and the downtown showroom, and you keep the industrial stock and the Beaverton warehouse. We keep it fluid. Fluidity, that was the buzzword. I noted the massive, convenient financial imbalance of her proposal. The downtown showroom had foot traffic, natural light, and the highest margin items. The Beaverton warehouse was a corrugated metal box next to a tire shop filled with heavy steel shelving and unrefinished credenzas. But I nodded anyway. I knew something she didn't, something Odette Sorel hadn't covered in her 3-day seminar. The following Monday, I drafted the separation agreement. I didn't do it on a napkin. I had our CPA draw up the LLC division, leases transferred, commercial bank accounts unlinked, liability officially severed. I printed it all out and presented the binder to her that evening on the living room coffee table. She laughed, flipping carelessly through the pages. Always obsessed with the fine print, she muttered, signing her name on the tabs without reading the indemnity clauses. What had been completely masked by our half-decade of partnership was a very simple, very brutal reality. Isabel had never navigated a single logistical crisis in her career. I had absorbed every supply chain shock, every damaged freight claim, every late-night vendor dispute without ever burdening her creative process. She assumed a 1960s Danish teak sideboard just magically appeared on the showroom floor, smelling like fresh oil. She didn't know about the customs brokers, the union fees, or the volatile cost of diesel. By week 3, the cracks began showing. My phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. I was in Beaverton, unloading a pallet of brass factory lamps. Hey, Isabel said. Her voice was tight, trying to sound casual. Can I borrow Holt and the freight team for the weekend? I booked a massive pop-up in the Pearl District, but I just got the quotes back, and I didn't realize commercial movers charge union rates on weekends. I wiped the grease off my hands. Holt doesn't work for free, Isabel, and he's on my payroll now. If you want my freight team, you have to contract them at their day rate. I'm your wife, she snapped. We are separate entities, I replied. You wanted autonomy to scale. Scaling costs money. She hung up on me. She ended up renting a U-Haul and trying to move 6 heavy velvet sectionals herself with the help of a barista she hired off Craigslist. One of the sectionals got wedged in a freight elevator and tore down the back seam, a $3,000 loss. By week 6, the phone rang again. This time it was an emergency. My shipment is locked at customs in Seattle, she said, skipping the greeting entirely. Can you wire me $2,800 for the import tariff? I didn't factor international freight taxes into the retail price. If they hold it past Friday, they charge daily storage fee. I'll reimburse you. I looked at my computer screen. Unburdened by her extravagant marketing expenses and impulsive purchasing trips, my own overhead had plummeted. I had capital I had never seen before. I had aggressively reinvested, signing 4 exclusive staging contracts with boutique hotels. I was moving volume, not aesthetic. I'll wire it, I said. But I'm sending you a promissory note first. Sign it via DocuSign, and the funds will transfer. Are you serious right now? She asked, her voice cracking. Always obsessed with the fine print, I reminded her. She signed it. I wired the money. I created a private folder on my desktop named Liabilities and dropped the PDF inside. I wasn't being vindictive. My brain just requires organized data. By week 9, the requests stopped being about inventory and started being about survival. She had blown her entire monthly operating budget catering an influencer launch party hosted by Sloan Calloway, someone with 500,000 followers who demanded a $5,000 appearance fee and free champagne for her entourage. The party looked incredible on Instagram, but likes don't pay commercial rent. I need you to cover the insurance premium on the van, she texted me at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. I didn't reply. Simultaneously, my side of the business was quietly exploding. Without Isabel draining the accounts for high-end photo shoots and custom-branded packaging, my profit margins widened. I was selling industrial dining tables and reclaimed steel fixtures in bulk to restaurant groups. It wasn't glamorous. My Instagram grid was just poorly lit photos of wood grain taken on my phone. But my accountant was thrilled. By month 3, her documented debt to me hovered around $6,500. Then the collateral damage started. I was at the warehouse when a primary vendor called me, Soren Drent. Soren had been supplying us with raw European textiles for 4 years. He was a no-nonsense guy who operated on trust and net 30 terms. I need to know what's going on with your wife, Soren said, his voice flat. We separated the business, Soren. I sent you the email in August. I saw the email. But she's dodging my invoices. She's 60 days past due on a $5,000 fabric order. She won't return my calls, but I see her posting videos of herself drinking matcha lattes in a brand new showroom. I need to know if you're going to make me whole, or if I have to send this to collection. My stomach tight. She wasn't just failing. She was burning the legacy reputation I had spent 6 years building. Soren, I said quietly. Her LLC is legally distinct from mine. I am not liable for her debt. I see, Soren said. The disappointment in his voice was thick. Then she's blacklisted. And honestly, I'm going to have to think hard about extending terms to you in the future too. He hung up. I drove home that that night in silence. When I walked into the house, Isabel was on the couch, staring blankly at a muted television. She looked exhausted. The manic energy from Austin was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, brittle posture. We ate dinner in silence. We were living in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, but there was a massive, invisible wall of failing LLCs and unpaid invoices between us. Then came the second Tuesday in November. It was pouring rain, the kind of relentless, freezing Pacific Northwest rain that makes the roads slick and the streetlights bleed. I was in bed reading when my phone lit up. 10:15 p.m. Isabel, I need you to come to the showroom, she whispered. Please. I didn't ask questions. I put my boots on, grabbed my keys, and drove downtown. The street was empty. The lights inside her showroom were blazing. When I unlocked the glass door and stepped inside, the heat wasn't on. The air was freezing. The space, which used to be packed with carefully curated vignettes, was practically bare. Just a few unsold, damaged velvet sectionals sitting awkwardly on the concrete floor. Isabel was sitting on the floor, leaning against a bare wall. She was still wearing her winter coat. Her makeup was streaked, her eyes bloodshot. She was clutching a piece of paper, not an invoice, a bright red final demand letter. I walked over and crouched down in front of her. I took the letter from her shaking hand. It was from Declan Fairfax, the commercial property manager. I'm completely insolvent, she choked out, her voice echoing in the empty, cold room. I'm $18,000 behind on the lease. Declan is changing the locks on Friday, and Soren voided my wholesale license. She wiped her eyes, leaving a smear of mascara across her wrist. It makes no sense. My Instagram engagement is triple yours. I have the followers. I have the aesthetic. I should be pulling in 40 grand a month. I didn't offer a platitude. I didn't tell her it would be okay. I unzipped my jacket, pulled my tablet from my interior pocket, logged into my corporate financial dashboard, and handed it to her. The net profit margin glowing on the screen read $84,200. Her breathing hitched. She stared at the green numbers like they were written in a foreign language. Is this annual? That is the last 16 weeks, I answered flatly. Even after absorbing the cost of your freight crew, the international customs penalties, and the lost hours dealing with the fallout of your delayed shipment. She stared at the digital graphs for an agonizingly long time. Her hands were visibly trembling, holding the glass screen. This isn't how I pictured it, she whispered, a tear dropping directly onto the tablet. I thought separating would let me fly without being weighed down by your spreadsheets and your caution. You demanded absolute autonomy to scale, I reminded her. The words felt heavy in the freezing room. Those were your exact words in August. You said I was stifling you. I was arrogant, she finally admitted, her voice entirely defeated. She looked small. The visionary aesthetic director was gone. You handled the nightmare behind the scenes every single day. You made it look so effortless that I convinced myself I was the only one generating real value. She looked up, her eyes pleading. I'm drowning. Please, can we merge the LLCs back together? Can you talk to Declan? I looked at the woman I had spent 6 years protecting from the brutal reality of our industry. I felt a flicker of pity, but my eyes drifted from her face back to the red demand letter on the floor. I picked it up to look at the exact dates of the missed payments. As I turned to the second page of the eviction notice, my eyes caught a paragraph at the bottom, a standard legal clause, but the details filled in underneath it made the blood freeze in my veins. It wasn't just a corporate eviction. Isabel, I said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Declan's letter says he's initiating asset seizure against the personal guarantor. She stopped crying. She froze completely. She wouldn't look at me. Your LLC was brand new in August, I said, my voice dangerously calm, piecing the horror together in real time. It had zero credit history. No commercial landlord in downtown Portland would give a brand new LLC a prime retail lease without a personal guarantee. She pulled her knees to her chest. Isabel, I repeated, the words snapping like a whip. Did you sign a personal guarantee for this lease? I had to, she whispered to the floor. Odette Sorrell said, you have to bet on yourself. You have to put skin in the game. Did you use the house? Silence. The rain lashed against the large glass storefront windows. I used the house, she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. But the property is in the family trust. I couldn't use it as collateral with just my signature. I stood up. The room began to spin slightly. I looked at the floor, at the unsold velvet couches, at my wife shivering in her coat. You forged my signature on a commercial lease guarantee, I stated. It wasn't a question. She finally looked up at me, terrified. I thought I'd be making 40 grand a month. I thought it wouldn't matter. I thought I'd pay it off before you ever knew. We were no longer talking about a failing business. We were no longer talking about who kept the mid-century furniture. My wife had quietly, desperately, legally attached our home to her sinking ship, and the water was already over the deck. I didn't yell. I think that terrified her more than if I had started throwing the heavy velvet cushions across the room. I just stood there, listening to the rain beat against the glass storefront, feeling a cold, heavy knot form in my stomach. Show it to me, I said. What? She stammered, wrapping her coat tighter around herself. The lease. Isabel, pull up the executed lease. She crawled over to her oversized leather tote bag and pulled out her MacBook. She set it on an empty shipping crate, her fingers shaking so badly she couldn't type in her password on the first try. I watched the glow of the screen illuminate her pale face. She opened her email, searched for Declan Fairfax's domain, and clicked on a PDF attachment. I turned the laptop toward me. I scrolled past the square footage, the common area maintenance fees, and the tenant improvement allowance. I went straight to the last page. There it was, my name, rendered in a neat cursive digital font. Beside it, the DocuSign cryptographic hash. I clicked on the certificate of completion. I know how digital signatures work. I use them every day for freight contract. The certificate popped up, displaying the IP address and the timestamp of the device that executed the signature. I recognized the IP address instantly. It was our home router. The timestamp was August 14, 9:30 p.m. I stared at the numbers, remembering that exact night. It was the night after I had presented her with the separation binder. I had been in the garage, changing the oil in the delivery van. She had been sitting at the kitchen island, drinking wine, listening to a podcast about female founders, and quietly committing a felony against her own husband. It's a 5-year lease, I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else, at $6,000 a month, plus triple net. I was going to renegotiate after the first year, she whispered. There is no renegotiating a commercial lease, Isabel, and the eviction notice isn't just for the $18,000 you're behind. Look at clause 14. I pointed at the screen. She didn't look. It's an acceleration clause. If you default, the entire remaining balance of the lease becomes immediately due. You don't owe Declan Fairfax $18,000. You owe him $342,000. And because you forged my name as the personal guarantor, he can place a lien on the family trust to get it. She let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. You can fix it. You have the capital now. now? You said your margins were at 84,000. We can pay the back rent tomorrow. I slowly closed the laptop. The sudden darkness in the room felt absolute. My capital, I corrected her, belongs to my LLC, the one you demanded to be separated from. I am not draining my operating accounts to bail out a fraudulent lease. It's our house, she screamed, finally breaking. The echo was deafening in the empty showroom. If he takes the house, you lose it too. You have to pay it. No, I said, stepping away from the shipping crate. I don't, because I didn't sign it. I turned my back on her and walked toward the glass door. Where are you going? Panic spiked in her voice. She scrambled to her feet. You can't just leave me here. What am I supposed to do? You're the sole proprietor, I said, putting my hand on the cold metal handle. Scale. I walked out into the rain and got into my truck. I locked the doors, turned the heater on high, and sat there for a long time watching the water warp the view of her showroom through the windshield. I saw her pacing inside, holding her phone to her ear, probably calling Odette Sorrell for emergency mindset coaching. I put the truck in drive and headed home. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the dining room table with a cup of black coffee and a legal pad. I listed out the assets in the family trust. The house, obviously, a Vanguard mutual fund we had started when we got married, a few bonds, nothing liquid enough to cover a $300,000 commercial default. At 8 a.m. the next morning, I was sitting in the reception area of a law firm in the Pearl District. Whitmore was an estate and business attorney I had used a few times for complex vendor dispute. He was in his 60s, perpetually tired, and had a mind like a steel trap. He called me into his office, poured us both coffee from a carafe on his desk, and listened while I laid out the timeline. I didn't soften it. I didn't try to protect her. I told him about the mastermind retreat, the business separation, the plummeting revenue, and finally, the forged DocuSign certificate. I slid the printed copies of the lease and the eviction notice across his desk. Whitmore put on his reading glasses and studied the documents for 5 silent minutes. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner of his office. Declan Fairfax, Whitmore finally said, tapping the red demand letter. Of course it's Fairfax. The man is a vulture. He deliberately targets first-time retail tenants because he knows they'll fail, and he structures the leases so he can cannibalize their personal assets when they do. He's threatening asset seizure on the house, I said. It's an irrevocable living trust. Whitmore took his glasses off and rubbed his eyes. Here is your reality. You have exactly 2 options, and both of them are going to be incredibly painful. He held up one finger. Option 1. We fight the guarantee. We claim fraud. I draft an affidavit stating that your signature was forged. We present the IP log, and we legally sever you from this debt. What happens to Isabel if we do that? Declan Fairfax is not a forgiving man, Whitmore said bluntly. If he loses his guarantor, he loses his collateral. He will immediately hand the forged documents over to the district attorney. Your wife will be indicted for wire fraud and identity theft. Given the dollar amount, it's a Class B felony. She will face prison time. I looked out the window at the gray Portland skyline. And option 2, Whitmore held up a second finger. You absorb it. You ratify the signature after the fact. You pay the $18,000 in arrears today to stop the eviction, and you assume the liability for the remaining 3 years of the lease. You keep her out of prison, but you chain yourself to a failing showroom and a $300,000 anchor. I don't have $300,000 in liquid cash, I said. Even with my recent staging contract, I'm reinvesting heavy. My cash flow is tied up in inventory. Then Fairfax will take the house, Whitmore said simply. He'll force a sale to satisfy the debt. I leaned back in the leather chair. The sheer audacity of her entitlement was suffocating. She had gambled my safety net to play at being an empire builder, and now my choices were to make her a felon or make myself homeless. Can I negotiate with Fairfax? I asked. Offer him a kill fee to break the lease? Whitmore sighed. You can try. But remember, the moment you walk into Fairfax's office and offer him a settlement, you are tacitly admitting the signature is valid. You can't offer to pay him off and then claim forgery later if he refuses. Once you take ownership of the negotiation, you own the debt. Understood. What do you want to do? Whitmore asked. I looked at the forged signature on the paper. I thought about the 6 years I spent managing the unglamorous, grinding reality of our business so she could maintain her curated aesthetic life. I thought about the way she looked at me in the kitchen when she came back from Austin, like I was an employee she was finally firing. Draft the affidavit of forgery, I said. Don't file it yet. Just have it ready. Whitmore nodded. He didn't judge. He just made a note on his legal pad. And in the meantime, I'm going to go see Declan Fairfax. I left the law office and drove straight to Fairfax Commercial Management. It was located on the top floor of a sleek, newly renovated building downtown, the kind of building built on the corpses of failed small businesses. The receptionist told me Mr. Fairfax didn't take walk-in. I told her to call his office and tell him the personal guarantor for Suite 402 was here with a cashier's check. 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from Declan Fairfax. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, wearing a bespoke suit and a Rolex that cost more than my delivery van. He had the calm, dead eyes of a casino pit boss. I'm surprised to see you, Fairfax said, leaning back in his chair. Your wife has been dodging my calls for 3 weeks. I assumed the guarantor would be equally evasive. I prefer dealing with things directly, I said. I didn't sit down. I stood in front of his desk. She's 18,000 behind. If I hand you a check for 25 right now, will you let us break the lease and walk away? Fairfax smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. 25,000? No, I have a legally binding contract for $342,000 secured by a very nice property in the West Hills. Why would I take a 90% haircut just to do you a favor? Because the showroom is empty, I countered. You can relist the space tomorrow. Get a new tenant paying current market rate. You pocket the 25,000, double dip on the new lease, and avoid a protracted legal battle. Fairfax picked up a silver pen and spun it between his fingers. A legal battle? Over what? A signed personal guarantee? There is no battle. I file the lien, I force the sale, I get my money. He stopped spinning the pen and pointed it at me. Your wife signed a terrible contract. She didn't read the default clauses, she didn't negotiate the common area fees, and she assumed Instagram likes were currency. That's not my problem. That's my profit model. I kept my face entirely neutral. So you won't accept a buyout. I'll accept a buyout for $200,000, Fairfax said. Wire transfer by Friday. Otherwise, I lock the doors on the showroom at 5 p.m., seize whatever inventory is left inside, and Monday morning, my lawyers start the paperwork against your family trust. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. Tell your wife I loved her launch party, by the way. Looked very expensive. I walked out of the building and into the cold midday air. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and gray. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Holt, my warehouse manager. Hey boss, we got a problem at the Beaverton spot. You need to get here. I drove out of the city, taking the highway toward the industrial district. When When I pulled up to my corrugated metal warehouse, I saw Holt standing by the loading dock. He wasn't in his usual Carhartt jacket. He was wearing a high-vis vest, standing next to a man with a clipboard. Behind them was a massive flatbed truck, idling loudly. I parked and walked over. "What's going on, Holt?" Holt looked uncomfortable. He pointed at the man with the clipboard. "This guy says he's here for the inventory. He's got paperwork." I turned to the man. "I'm the owner." "What inventory?" The man handed me a carbon copy form. "Freight retrieval," he said in a bored voice. "Authorization for repossession." I looked at the document. It was a commercial lien execution. "This is a mistake," I said. "My LLC owes zero debt. We operate strictly on cash and net 30 terms, and we are fully paid up." "Not according to this," the man said, tapping the clipboard. I looked closer at the vendor name listed on the repossession order. It wasn't one of my industrial suppliers. It was Soren Drent. "Soren is a textile supplier," I said, my heart starting to hammer against my rib. "I don't buy textiles. My wife buys textiles. The order says the LLC operating out of this address use the on-site inventory as collateral for a 90-day line of credit," the man said. He pulled out a secondary sheet of paper, signed 3 weeks ago. I snatched the paper from his hand. It was a credit application with Soren Drent's supply company. At the bottom was the signature line. Isabel hadn't forged my name this time. She had signed her own name, but under the company name section, she hadn't listed her new, failing LLC. She had listed mine, and she had used my warehouse address. She legally bound my company? I muttered, the sheer scale of the mess expanding in front of me. She had been desperate. When Soren cut her off, she must have filled out a new application using my established business name and pristine credit history to get the textiles she needed to finish a custom order. "We're authorized to clear $40,000 worth of assets to satisfy the default," the man with the clipboard said. He gestured to his crew in the flatbed. "We can do this easy, or we can wait for the sheriff to come enforce the writ. Your call, buddy. I need 5 minutes," I told the man with the clipboard. "I'm on the clock, man," he said, shifting his weight. "5 minutes, or I call the Beaverton PD and report an illegal seizure," I said. My voice was completely level. "You have a writ based on a fraudulent credit application. If you load one piece of my inventory onto that truck before I verify this with the vendor, I will have you arrested for commercial theft." He looked at my eyes, then at Holt, who was standing a few feet away with his arms crossed, staring holes into the repossession crew. The man took a step back and tapped his watch. 5 minutes. "Then I'm calling the sheriff." I walked away from the loading dock, pulling my phone from my pocket. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from a pure, unadulterated rage that felt cold and dense in my chest. I dialed Soren Drent. He picked up on the third ring. "If you're calling about the repo, it's out of my hands," he said immediately. "I warned you." "Soren," I said, keeping my voice low. "She used my LLC name. She used my warehouse address. You approved a $40,000 line of credit without verifying it with me? I've been doing business with you for 4 years," Soren fired back, his voice rising. "The application had your company name, your tax ID, and it was signed by your wife, who has been a co-owner for 5.5 years. How the hell was I supposed to know she was doing it behind your back? I thought you guys merged the businesses back together. You're married. We separated the legal entities. I sent you the documentation in August, and in October, I got a new application with her signature and your tax ID," Soren said. "She told my accounts manager that the separation was temporary for tax purposes, and that you were combining operations again for a massive fourth-quarter push. She had the paperwork. She had your EIN. I extended the credit because I trusted your business, not hers. When she defaulted and ghosted me, my lawyer pulled the trigger. I stopped walking. The gravel crunched under my boots. I looked back at the flatbed truck. Holt was still standing between it and the roll-up door. "Soren, if they take $40,000 of my inventory today, I default on 4 boutique hotel staging contracts. You will gut my entire operation. Then wire me the money," Soren said flatly. "$42,500. That covers the textiles, the late fees, and the collection cost. You wire it right now, and I call off the truck." I closed my eyes. The rain started up again, a fine, freezing mist. "I don't have $42,000 in liquid cash just sitting around to burn, Soren. I have operating capital." "Then let them load the truck." "I'm sorry, man, truly, but I'm not taking a 40 grand loss because you can't control your wife." He hung up. I stood in the freezing mist for a long time. I thought about calling Whitmore, but Whitmore couldn't stop a legal repossession crew in 4 minutes. To fight the writ, I would have to file an injunction, which would take days. In the meantime, my inventory would be locked in a holding facility, my hotel clients would cancel their staging contract, and my own pristine business would collapse. Isabel hadn't just tied me to a sinking ship. She had deliberately blown a hole in the hull of my life raft. I opened my banking app on my phone. I stared at my operating account balance. $84,000 in hard-earned, meticulously planned profit. The capital I was going to use to expand into Seattle. The capital that was my absolute safety net against Declan Fairfax. I initiated a same-day domestic wire transfer to Soren Drent's corporate account. $42,500. I hit confirm. The balance plummeted. Half of my net worth wiped out in a single keystroke because my wife wanted to look successful on Instagram. I walked back to the loading dock. The man with the clipboard was pulling out his phone. "Call dispatch," I said to him. "Tell them to call Soren Drent. The debt is satisfied in full." The man frowned, but he made the call. He spoke in low tones for a minute, nodded, and hung up. He looked disappointed. "All right, boys," he yelled to his crew. "Pack it up. We're done here." I didn't watch them leave. I walked straight past Holt, got into my truck, and drove home. The house was quiet when I walked in. I found Isabel upstairs in the master bedroom. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, a half-empty glass of water on the nightstand. She looked up when I entered. She had finally washed her makeup off. Her face looked pale and tight. "Did you talk to Declan?" she asked. Her voice was small, hopeful, like a child asking a parent if they had fixed a broken toy. I stood in the doorway. I didn't take off my wet boots. "I talked to Declan. He wants $200,000 by Friday, or he seizes the trust." She let out a sharp gasp and covered her mouth. "But that's not why I'm home," I continued, my voice entirely dead. "I just came from the Beaverton warehouse. A repo crew was backing a flatbed up to my loading dock." Isabel dropped her hand from her mouth. Her eyes widened. "They were there to seize $40,000 of my inventory," I said, walking slowly toward the bed. "Because you used my company's tax ID and my warehouse address to secure a line of credit from Soren Drent after you forged my name on a commercial lease." She pressed herself back against the headboard. "I didn't forge your name on the credit application. I signed my own name. You committed corporate fraud," I said. "You lied to his accounts manager. You used my EIN. You dragged my company into your failure. I was going to pay him back." She cried, defensive anger suddenly flaring up to replace the panic. "I had a guaranteed contract. It was a sure thing. Nothing is a sure sure thing, I yelled. I finally raised my voice, and the sound of it made her flint. I've been telling you that for 6 years. That's why I kept the overhead low. That's why I negotiated net 30 term. That's why I didn't spend $5,000 on champagne for an influencer. You don't understand the market. She shot back. I landed a massive fit-out. Delaney Wyndham, the Wyndham Agency. They were opening a new headquarters in the Pearl. She wanted custom European textiles. It was an $80,000 contract. If I landed it, my whole year was made. I had to get the raw materials from Soren, but my LC didn't have the credit history yet. So you stole mine. I borrowed it, she insisted, her voice breaking. I did the install. The space looked incredible. Then where is the money? I asked. If you did an $80,000 install, why were you crying on a bare floor last night with a final demand letter from Declan Fairfax? Isabel looked away. She stared at the carpet. Her defensive anger drained out of her, leaving her looking hollowed out and pathetic. She didn't pay, Isabel whispered. Who didn't pay? Delaney. I stared at her. You did an $80,000 commercial fit out and the client just didn't pay you? She hated it, Isabel said, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. She said the fabric color was off. She said the delivery was 3 days late. She invoked the penalty clauses in the contract. She said the entire install was a breach of deliverables and refused to pay the final invoice. She kept the furniture and locked me out. I rubbed my face with both hands. The stupidity of it was staggering. Show me the contract. What? The contract you signed with Delaney Wyndham. Show it to me. It's on my laptop at the showroom, she mumbled. Let me guess, I said, looking down at her. You downloaded a template off the internet. You didn't run it past Whitmore. You didn't require a 50% non-refundable deposit for custom materials, and you agreed to penalty clauses that allowed her to keep the goods if the timeline shifted by 72 hours. Isabel didn't answer. Her silence was a screaming confirmation. She had been completely outplayed by a shark in a tailored suit. Delaney Wyndham ran one of the most aggressive PR agencies in the city. She saw a naive, desperate aesthetic designer coming a mile away, structured a contract loaded with trapdoors, let Isabel front the $40,000 for the custom European textiles, and then legally stole the entire installation on a technicality. I had to wire Soren $42,000 30 minutes ago to stop him from liquidating my warehouse, I told her. Isabel looked up, her eyes wide. You paid him? I had to protect my own business from your fraud. But your capital, she started, is gone, I finished, cut in half, which means my ability to buy Declan Fairfax off is gone. We sat in silence. The reality of the math settled over the room like a heavy blanket. I'm going to call Delaney, Isabel said suddenly, sitting up, wiping her face. A frantic, useless energy possessed her. I'll go to her office. I'll demand the furniture back. If I can get the sectionals out of her headquarters, I can liquidate them. I can sell them to a liquidator in Seattle for 20 cents on the dollar. It would be enough to pay Declan the arrears. You have no legal right to the furniture, Isabel. You signed it away in the penalty clause. If you walk into her office, she'll have you trespass. I have to do something, she screamed. He's going to take the house. He's going to take the house, I repeated calmly, because you gave it to him. I turned around and walked out of the bedroom. I went downstairs, poured a glass of water, and stood at the kitchen island, the same island where she had sat 3 months ago and told me I was stifling her. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was Whitmore. I've been doing some digging on Declan Fairfax. The lawyer's gravelly voice came through the speaker. And on the property management group holding your wife's lease. I don't have the buyout money, Whitmore, I said, staring at the rain against the kitchen window. I just had to drop 40 grand to cover another one of her fraudulent debts. My liquid capital is gone. Well, that complicates things, Whitmore said, unbothered. But listen to me. Fairfax doesn't actually own that building. I frowned. What do you mean? It's Fairfax Commercial Management. He's the property manager. He's the face. He executes the leases and collects the margin. But the actual deed to the building is held by a private equity group out of Chicago, a holding company called Vanguard Properties. So, Whitmore said, I pulled the boilerplate lease agreement Fairfax uses, the one your wife signed. Fairfax wrote in an acceleration clause that funnels the default penalty directly into his management LLC, not the holding company. He's skimming the defaults. If the tenant fails, he evicts them, seizes the guarantor's assets to pay himself a massive penalty, and then just tells the holding company the tenant went bankrupt and he's looking for a new one. I gripped the edge of the counter. Is that legal? It's a gray area, but it means the private equity group in Chicago doesn't know he's extorting his tenants for 6-figure payouts. They just think they have a high turnover rate. Whitmore paused, and I found something else. Do you know who owns the PR firm on the 6th floor of that same building? A cold realization washed over me. The Wyndham Agency. Exactly, Whitmore said. Delaney Wyndham leases the entire 6th floor from Fairfax, and according to the public permit filings I just pulled, she's currently undergoing a massive office expansion, an expansion that requires a lot of custom furniture. They didn't just steal the inventory, I said, the puzzle pieces snapping together with a sickening, heavy clarity. They engineered the default. It's a closed loop grift. Whitmore agreed, the rustle of paperwork echoing through the phone. Wyndham acts as the client. She demands high-end, custom installations with aggressive penalty clauses. Once the mark, in this case, your wife, fronts the capital and completes the install, Wyndham claims breach of contract. She refuses to pay and lock the vendor out. The mark's cash flow collapses. They default on their retail lease downstairs. Fairfax swoops in, evicts them, and triggers the personal guarantee to extort a 6-figure settlement. Meanwhile, the disputed furniture from the showroom just gets quietly moved up the freight elevator to furnish Wyndham's expanding office space. I stared at the water pooling on the granite counter. Fairfax gets the buyout money. Wyndham gets a free $80,000 office fit out. And Vanguard Properties in Chicago never looks twice because Fairfax keeps his building fully leased on paper, right up until the manufactured defaults, Whitmore said. It's highly illegal, but almost impossible to prove unless you can tie the movement of the physical assets to both parties. I can tie it, I said, my voice dropping an octave. I'm a logistics manager. Nothing moves in a Class A commercial building without a bonded freight manifest. I hung up the phone and turned around. Isabel was standing at the bottom of the stairs. She was gripping the banister, her knuckles completely white. She had listened to the entire conversation. The defensive anger that had animated her upstairs was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, nauseating realization. She wasn't an unlucky visionary. She was a mark. Who introduced you to Delaney Wyndham? I asked her. She swallowed hard. She looked like she might throw up right there on the hardwood. Odette, she whispered. Odette Sorrell. Isabel nodded slowly. At the retreat in Austin. Odette told me Delaney was looking for a fresh aesthetic director for her new headquarters. She said she personally recommended me because my brand was so disruptive. She even reviewed the contract Delaney sent me. She told me it was standard corporate boilerplate and that I needed to sign it immediately to show I could play at their level. level. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the sheer, predatory scale of it wash over me. The Elevate and Scale Mastermind Retreat wasn't a business seminar. It was a hunting ground. Odette Sorel charged these women $5,000 a ticket to sit in a hotel ballroom, hyped them up on empowerment rhetoric, convinced them to sever ties with any cautious business partners, and then fed the most gullible ones directly to Delaney Wyndham and Declan Fairfax. I thought they respected me. Isabel choked out. A tear tracked down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. Delaney took me to lunch. She ordered a $300 bottle of Sancerre. She told me I was going to be the next big name in the Pacific Northwest. Where is your access card for the building? I asked. She blinked, confused by the pivot. Declan deactivated it when he served the eviction notice. Not the lobby card, the freight elevator fob. Did Declan take it? No, she said, her voice shaking. He didn't ask for it. It's in my tote bag. Get it. 30 minutes later, I was parked in an alleyway 3 blocks from Fairfax's building. The rain had settled into a steady, miserable drizzle. I wasn't going into the lobby. I didn't want to see Declan Fairfax, and I certainly didn't want him to see me. I walked down the alley, stepped over a puddle of oily water, and approached the recessed loading dock. Commercial buildings like this rely on a strict ecosystem. The people in the suits upstairs think they run the building, but the building is actually run by the dockmaster in the basement. I walked up the concrete ramp. A guy in a faded union jacket was sitting on a folding chair near a massive industrial compactor, eating a sandwich and looking at a tablet. His name tag said, Sullivan. Dock's closed for receiving, buddy, Sullivan called out without looking up from his screen. Come back Monday at 8. I'm not receiving, I said, walking up to him. I pulled a $100 bill from my wallet and laid it flat on his tablet screen. I'm auditing. Sullivan stopped chewing. He looked at the bill, then up at me. He had the hard, lined face of a guy who had been managing commercial freight for 20 years. He didn't touch the money. Auditing what? Suite 402, I said. Vintage furniture showroom. The tenant was locked out. Sullivan let out a dry, knowing laugh. Yeah, I know 402. Girl in there didn't know a pallet jack from a hole in the ground. Tried to bring in 6 velvet couches through the lobby doors once. Fairfax had a conniption. I need the freight logs for the last 72 hours, I said. Specifically, I need to know if the inventory from 402 left the building, or if it went upstairs. Sullivan looked at the $100 bill again. Look, man, Fairfax is a hard ass. If he catches me handing out manifest to strangers, I lose my union gig. $100 doesn't cover my pension. I pulled a second $100 bill out and laid it next to the first. I'm the legal guarantor on the lease for 402. Fairfax is trying to seize my house for the default. I just need to know if the inventory is still on the premises. Sullivan stared at me for a long moment. He saw the cold exhaustion in my eyes. He sighed, picked up the 2 bills, and shoved them into his jacket pocket. It didn't leave the building, Sullivan said quietly. Fairfax came down here Tuesday night after hours, handed me a work order, told me to take the freight elevator up to 4, clear out the showroom, and dump it all on 6. Suite 600, I confirmed. The Wyndham Agency. Yeah, Wyndham's expanding, taking over the whole floor. The contractors have been up there all month knocking down drywall, but the furniture went up Tuesday. Heavy stuff. Teak desks, steel shelving, and about 6 of those ugly velvet sectionals. Did Fairfax sign the internal transfer manifest? Sullivan shook his head. He told me to leave it off the books, said it was a temporary hold while he figured out the eviction paperwork, but I don't move a single box in this building without logging it. It's my ass on the line if something goes missing. He tapped his tablet, pulling up a digital spreadsheet. He turned the screen toward me. Internal transfer, 402 to 600, authorized by D. Fairfax, executed by Sullivan. I need a copy of that, I said. I can't print it, Sullivan warned, and I can't email it to you. That leaves a digital trail straight back to me. Just hold the tablet steady. I pulled out my phone and snapped a clear, high-resolution photo of the screen. I made sure the timestamp, the authorization name, and the suite numbers were perfectly legible. You didn't get that from me, Sullivan said, closing the app. Never met you, I said. I turned to walk away, then stopped. The fob for the freight elevator. Does the one assigned to 402 still work, or did Fairfax wipe it? Sullivan grimaced. Fairfax is cheap. He only resets the master lobby access when he locks someone out. He never pays the IT vendor to reset the freight fobs until a new tenant moves in. I thanked him and walked back out into the alley. I had the proof of the transfer, but a photo of a freight log wasn't enough to force a man like Fairfax to walk away from a $300,000 payout. He could easily claim he was just storing the seized collateral in Wyndham's empty office space. To break the grift wide open, I needed to prove Wyndham was actively using the stolen inventory for her daily operation. I needed photos of my wife's custom furniture, upholstered in the European textiles I had just paid Soren Drent $42,000 for, sitting in Delaney Wyndham's lobby. I looked at the heavy plastic freight fob in my hand. I couldn't go in now. The building was full of security guards and late-working corporate staff, but commercial buildings are ghost towns on Sunday morning. I got back in my truck and drove to my warehouse in Beaverton. I needed to prep. When I pulled up, Holt's beat-up sedan was still parked out front. I unlocked the side door and walked onto the massive concrete floor. The air smelled like sawdust, cold steel, and engine oil. It was exactly the way a business should smell. Functional, unpretentious, real. Holt was in the back office, running inventory numbers on his computer. He looked up when I walked in. Thought you went home for the day, boss. Change of plans, I said, pulling up a chair opposite his desk. Soren's repo rid is cleared. The inventory is safe. Holt leaned back, lacing his fingers together behind his head. Glad to hear it. You looked like you were going to murder that repo guy on the dock. What happened? Isabel happened, I said flatly. Holt didn't react. He had worked for me for 4 years. He knew the dynamic. He was the one who had refused to move Isabel's furniture on a weekend without union pay, an act of boundary setting I had specifically instructed him to enforce. How deep is the hole? Holt asked. 342,000, I said. Secured against my house by a forged signature, plus the 42 I just wired Soren to cover her raw materials. Holt whistled, a low, sharp sound. Christ, you calling Whitmore? Whitmore gave me my option. They both end with me bleeding out. So, I'm making a third option. I looked at him. I need you to come to downtown Portland with me tomorrow morning at 6:00 a.m. To do what? To break into the Wyndham Agency on the 6th floor of the Fairfax building. Holt dropped his hands from behind his head. He stared at me, his face deadpan. I'm a warehouse manager, boss. I make $28 an hour. I don't do commercial burglaries. We aren't stealing anything, I said. We're staging. I explained the grift. I laid out Odette Sorrell's pipeline, Delaney Wyndham's trapdoor contract, and Declan Fairfax's extortion loop. I showed him the photo of Sullivan's freight manifest. Wyndham stole the inventory Isabel built. It's sitting on the 6th floor right now, I said. I need to get up there, photograph the exact serial numbers on the teak frames, match them to Soren's textile invoices, and prove she's utilizing stolen goods. But I can't just wander around a locked PR agency. So how do we get in? I pulled Isabel's freight fob out of my pocket and tossed it onto his desk. This gets us up the service elevator, but the elevator opens into a secure secondary lobby on the 6th floor. There will be a glass door with a magnetic lock. I don't know how to pick a maglock, Holt said. We don't have to, I replied. Wyndham is doing a massive expansion. Sullivan said contractors have been knocking down drywall all month. That means there's a construction crew doing an active fit-out. And what happens when a commercial space is under active construction? Holt thought about it for a second. Then a slow grin spread across his face. The fire marshal requires the maglocks to be temporarily deactivated during weekend construction hours for emergency egress. Exactly. The doors will be dead. We just need to look like we belong there. I'll bring the high-vis vests and the hard hat, Holt said, standing up, and a clipboard. Nobody questions a guy holding a clipboard. I left the warehouse and drove back to the house. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective under the streetlights. When I walked through the front door, the house was dark. I found Isabel in the kitchen. She was sitting at the island in the dark, staring at the muted glow of her phone screen. She looked up when I turned on the overhead light. I called Odette, she said, her voice raspy. I stopped halfway to the fridge. You what? I called her, Isabel repeated. She looked feverish. I confronted her. I told her I knew what she and Delaney were doing. I told her you were a logistics expert and that you were going to track the inventory. A cold spike of adrenaline shot through my chest. Isabel, tell me exactly what Odette said. Isabel looked down at her phone. She laughed at me. She said I was being hysterical. And then she said, if I ever accused her of fraud again, she would forward the ENDA I signed at the Austin retreat to her legal team. Isabel looked up, her eyes wide with fresh panic. I didn't read the ENDA. I just signed it in the welcome packet. And then what? I demanded. 10 minutes later, Declan Fairfax texted me. She pushed her phone across the granite counter toward me. I looked at the screen. It was a text from Fairfax's number. Your mentor mentioned you're feeling stressed about the default. Just a reminder, the buyout offer expires Friday at 5 p.m. But if your husband contacts my staff or enters my building again, I withdraw the buyout offer entirely and file the lien against your family trust on Monday morning. He knew I had been at the loading dock. Odette had called Delaney. Delaney had called Fairfax. I looked at the text message, the cold white light of the screen reflecting off the kitchen counter. My wife hadn't just alerted them that we were onto the scam. She had given them the exact timeline they needed to cover their track. If we went to the 6th floor tomorrow morning, the magnetic locks wouldn't be dead, and Wyndham's stolen furniture might already be gone. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the phone. I just slowly slid it back across the granite island until it stopped right in front of her folded hand. You couldn't just sit still, I said. My voice was a dry, hollow rasp. You couldn't just let me handle it. You had to try and feel powerful again. I was trying to scare her, Isabel whispered, staring at the phone like it was a live grenade. I thought if Odette knew we were onto the grift, she'd panic. I thought she'd tell Declan to drop the lien, keep us quiet. I leaned over the counter, placing my weight on my palms until I was exactly at her eye level. Odette Sorrell runs a multi-state predatory funnel targeting naive women with trust funds and high credit limits. She doesn't get scared by a failing interior designer making empty threats over the phone. She gets proactive. I pulled my own phone from my pocket and dialed Holt. He answered on the second ring, the sound of a television playing low in the background. We still on for 6 a.m., boss? Holt asked. Stand down, I told him. The play is burned. What happened? Isabel called Odette. Odette called Wyndham. Wyndham called Fairfax. If we walk into that building tomorrow morning, the maglocks won't be dead. Fairfax will have building security waiting for us, or he'll just call the police and have us arrested for trespassing on an active construction site. It's over. Holt let out a long, heavy exhale through his nose. Damn it. So, what's the move? I don't know yet, but sleep in. I hung up. Isabel was crying again, those silent, heaving sobs that used to make me drop whatever I was doing, rush over, and wrap my arms around her. For 6 years, her tears were the ultimate override switch in our marriage. Now, looking at her shaking shoulders, I felt absolutely nothing. Just a profound, heavy exhaustion. I'm sorry, she choked out, burying her face in her hand. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to fix it. Go upstairs, I said. Please, go upstairs, Isabel. I cannot look at you right now. She flinched as if I had struck her. She picked up her phone, practically keeping her back to the wall, and retreated up the stairs. I listened to the bedroom door click shut. I stayed in the kitchen for another hour, drinking tap water, watching the digital clock on the oven shift from 1 kilo-am to 2 Fairfax had given us until Friday to pay the $200,000, but after Isabel's phone call, he had accelerated the timeline to Monday morning. It was currently Sunday. I had less than 30 hours before he filed a lien against the family trust, triggering a cascade that would end with the forced sale of my home. I needed proof that the furniture was on the 6th floor. Without the photos, Sullivan's digital freight log was circumstantial. Fairfax could easily claim he was just storing the seized collateral in Wyndham's empty expansion space until a liquidator arrived. I had to prove Wyndham was actively using the goods, integrating them into her business operation. My phone vibrated against the granite. It was an incoming call. The caller ID read Bastian Cahill. Bastian was Isabel's father. He lived in Scottsdale, played golf 3 times a week, and had always treated my blue-collar logistics background with a thinly veiled, polite condescension. He was the trustee of the family trust that owned our house. I answered it. Hello, Bastian. What the hell is going on up there? Bastian's voice boomed through the speaker, loud enough that I didn't need to hold the phone to my ear. Isabel just called her mother in hysterics. She's talking about evictions and losing the business, and she said you're refusing to help her out of a cash flow problem. She said you're letting some downtown landlord take the house out from under you out of spite. I closed my eyes. Even now, completely cornered, she was spinning the narrative. She couldn't help herself. The instinct to curate her image was pathological. Isabel doesn't have a cash flow problem, Bastian, I said, keeping my voice dead level. She has a felony problem. The line went entirely silent. I could hear the faint hum of a ceiling fan in the background on his end. Excuse me? Bastian said, the bluster instantly vanishing. Isabel leased a prime commercial showroom in August, I explained, leaning against the counter. The landlord required a personal guarantor. Isabel didn't tell me about the lease. Instead, she logged into my DocuSign account, forged my digital signature, and pledged the house, the property sitting in your family trust, as collateral. Then she defaulted to the tune of $342,000. That's, Bastian stammered. She wouldn't do that. She said you two were separating the business to scale. She separated the business so I wouldn't see the books. I corrected him. And it gets worse. Last month, she fraudulently used my company's tax ID and my warehouse address to take out a $40,000 line of credit for raw textiles. She defaulted on that, too, I had to wire the vendor $42,000 yesterday afternoon out of my own operating capital just to stop a repossession crew from liquidating my warehouse. Good God, Bastian breathed. The reality was hitting him like a physical blow. The landlord, he has a signed guarantee. He has a digitally certified signature linked to our home IP address, I said. He knows I didn't sign it. He runs an extortion ring targeting naive tenants. But if I formally claim forgery, he turns the IP logs over to the district attorney, and your daughter faces a Class B wire fraud indictment. If I ratify the signature to keep her out of prison, he seizes the house. I'll wire the money, Bastian said instantly, the paternal instinct kicking in. How much to make the landlord go away? He wants a $200,000 kill fee by tomorrow morning. I can't liquidate $200,000 by tomorrow morning, Bastian yelled, panic finally threading his voice. It's Sunday. The markets are closed, and the trust requires a 48-hour unseal period for major withdrawals. You have to stall him. There is no stalling Declan Fairfax. Isabel called the people running the grift tonight and threatened them. They accelerated the timeline. I rubbed my temples. I'm handling it, Bastian, but do not send her money. Do not promise her a bailout. And the next time she calls you crying about how I'm not supporting her aesthetic vision, ask her about the DocuSign log. I hung up before he could respond. I needed to move. Sitting in the dark kitchen wasn't going to generate leverage. I went to the hall closet, grabbed a heavy canvas jacket, and grabbed my key. At 7:30 am, I was sitting in a vinyl booth at a diner in the industrial district. Whitmore was sitting across from me, looking like he had slept in his suit. He was nursing a mug of black coffee and reviewing the text message from Fairfax on my phone. It's a threat, legally speaking, Whitmore said, sliding the phone back across the sticky table. But proving extortion in a civil context is incredibly difficult when the underlying contract, the guarantee, appears valid. Fairfax will just say he was offering a generous settlement window and your wife's erratic behavior caused him to rescind it. He's insulated. I don't want to sue him for extortion, I said. I don't have years to spend in civil court. I need to blow up his relationship with Vanguard Properties by tomorrow morning. I need the photos of Wyndham's 6th floor office, which you can't get, Whitmore pointed out, taking a sip of his coffee. Because your wife rang the dinner bell. If you enter that building, you're trespassing. Who filed the construction permits for Wyndham's expansion? I asked. You said you pulled the public filings yesterday. Whitmore opened his leather briefcase, pulled out a manila folder, and flipped through a few pages. The general contractor on record is Keating Construction, run by a guy named Griffin Keating, based out of a commercial yard in Gresham. If Wyndham is doing a full floor fit out, Keating has a foreman on site. The foreman has keys. The foreman has access. Whitmore lowered his coffee mug. He looked at me with a sharp, calculating gaze. Contractors don't let random civilians onto active job sites, my friend. Not unless they want to lose their bonded insurance. You think this Keating is going to risk his license to let you snoop around because you have a sob story about a bad lease? I don't want him to let me in, I said. I want to talk to him about Delaney Wyndham. Whitmore closed the folder and tapped it with his index finger. Be very careful here. You are walking a razor's edge between gathering evidence and tortious interference. Wyndham stole $40,000 of my physical property, I reminded him. I paid Soren Drent. My LLC satisfied the debt. The textiles covering those velvet sectionals belong to me. Conversion of property, Whitmore agreed softly. It's a beautiful angle. If you can prove the textiles are in Wyndham's possession, she is legally in receipt of stolen commercial goods. That gives you incredible leverage. But again, you need eyes inside Suite 600. I paid for the coffees, left a $10 tip on the table, and walked out to my truck. Gresham is a working-class suburb east of Portland. It took me 40 minutes to find the address listed on Keating Construction's permit filing. It wasn't a sleek corporate office. It was a half-acre gravel lot surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with barbed wire. Several heavy-duty flatbed trucks, a backhoe, and a row of temporary office trailers sat inside the perimeter. The main gate was open. A battered F-250 was parked next to the largest trailer. I pulled in, parked my truck, and walked up the metal steps to the trailer door. I knocked hard. A moment later, the door swung open. A man in his late 40s stood there. He had graying hair, a thick beard, and the permanent, exhausted scowl of a man who spends his life arguing with architects and city inspectors. He was wearing a flannel shirt and holding a mug of coffee. We're not hiring, he said gruffly. I'm looking for Griffin Keating, I said. You found him. What do you want? It's Sunday morning. I want to talk about your client on the 6th floor of the Fairfax building, I said. Delaney Wyndham. Griffin's expression instantly darkened. His jaw tightened, and he looked me up and down, assessing whether I was a lawyer, an inspector, or a process server. Who are you? My name doesn't matter, I said. I'm a logistics supplier. Wyndham screwed my wife out of an $80,000 custom furniture installation using a trapdoor penalty clause. Then her property manager used the default to try and seize my house. Griffin stared at me. Then, slowly, he pushed the trailer door open a few more inches. Come inside. The trailer smelled like stale tobacco, blueprints, and wet dog. The walls were plastered with scheduling whiteboards and city zoning maps. Griffin walked behind a scarred metal desk and sat down heavily in a swivel chair. Why are you here? Griffin asked, setting his mug down. Because people who run grifts like Wyndham don't just screw over naive interior designers, I said, leaning against the doorframe. They screw over everybody. I'm guessing she's not your favorite client. Griffin let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Favorite? She's a nightmare. We're 2 weeks behind schedule because she keeps changing the drywall specs without filing change orders, and she's currently refusing to release the final 20% draw on our contract. Why? She claims my drywall crew left a fine layer of gypsum dust on her new custom furniture, Griffin said, his voice dripping with disgust. The furniture that magically appeared in the middle of the night on Tuesday while we were off-site. I told her you don't move soft goods into an active dust zone. She didn't care. She locked my crew out on Friday afternoon and said she's back charging me $5,000 for specialty upholstery cleaning. I felt a cold thrill run down my spine. The arrogance of Delaney Wyndham was astounding. She wasn't just stealing inventory. She was weaponizing the stolen inventory to extort her own general contractor. Griffin, I said quietly, the furniture she's complaining about. Did your guys see it? Hard to miss. 6 massive velvet sectionals, a bunch of teak credenzas, expensive stuff. It's my stuff, I said. She stole it. I need to prove it's in that suite before tomorrow morning, or I lose my house. I know you can't let me into the building. Fairfax will have security watching. Damned right I can't let you in, Griffin said, crossing his arms. I've got a performance bond on that job. If I bring an unauthorized party onto the site and Wyndham catches it, she triggers a breach and keeps the whole final payout. I sympathize with you, buddy, but I'm not eating a $50,000 loss for a stranger. I don't need you to let me in, I said. I walked over to his desk. You're a commercial GC. You run liability protocols. When Wyndham Wyndham locked your guys out on Friday and claimed dust damage. What did your foreman do? Griffin narrowed his eyes, tracking my logic. He took site photos. Standard operating procedure. We document the site condition every day before we leave to prove the work was done to spec. Time-stamped photos, I said. High-res. Time and date stamped by the software. Griffin confirmed. Did he photograph the furniture she was complaining about? He photographed everything. He spent 20 minutes taking macro shots of those velvet couches to prove there wasn't a speck of drywall dust on them. I pulled my wallet out of my canvas jacket. I took out 5 $100 bills, the cash I had grabbed from the house safe before leaving, and laid them flat on his desk. I need those photos, Griffin. I don't need the drywall shots. I just need the high-res shots of the furniture. If I can read the custom tags on the teak frames, I can match them to the supply invoices. If I have that, I have Wyndham dead to rights for receiving stolen commercial goods. Griffin looked at the cash. He didn't touch it. He looked up at me. Wyndham's trying to rob you of $5 grand using my stolen property as the excuse, I said. Give me the photos, and I promise you, by tomorrow afternoon, Delaney Wyndham is going to have much bigger problems than drywall dust. She'll pay your final draw just to keep you quiet. Griffin stared at the money for a long time. Then he reached over, opened his laptop, and woke the screen. My foreman uploads the liability files to our cloud server every night, Griffin muttered, clicking through a series of folders. Suite 600. Friday, November 14th. Let's see what we've got. He turned the laptop toward me. The screen was filled with thumbnails. Griffin clicked the first one, expanding it. The resolution was pristine. It was a wide shot of Wyndham's new lobby. And there, sitting on the polished concrete floor, were 3 of Isabel's massive, rusted orange velvet sectionals. I clicked the right arrow key, advancing through the gallery. Teak desk. Reclaimed steel shelving. The exact inventory I had watched Holt unload in my Beaverton warehouse a month ago, before Isabel borrowed it. I stopped on a close-up shot. The foreman had taken a macro photo of the velvet armrest to prove it was clean, but in the bottom corner of the frame, clearly visible, was the small brass manufacturer's tag tacked into the wood base. Soren Textiles Lot 409. It was the exact lot number on the invoice I had paid yesterday afternoon. Can you email these to me? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Griffin scooped up the $500 and shoved it into his shirt pocket. Give me your email address. 10 minutes later, I walked out of the Keating construction trailer with 32 time-stamped, high-resolution photographs sitting in my inbox. The rain had stopped, and a weak, watery sun was trying to push through the Portland overcast. I got into my truck, locked the doors, and sat there for a moment. The adrenaline was finally leveling out, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I had the text from Fairfax threatening my house. I had the photo of Sullivan's freight log proving the internal transfer. I had Soren Drent's invoices proving my LLC owned the raw materials. And now, I had Griffin's time-stamped photos proving Wyndham was actively using the stolen property. The closed-loop grift was entirely documented. I drove home. I didn't listen to the radio. I just drafted the execution plan in my head. When I walked through the front door, the house was dead quiet. I went into the kitchen. Isabel wasn't there. I walked into the living room. Empty. I walked upstairs. The door to the master bedroom was open. Isabel was standing next to the bed. She had a large hard-shell suitcase open on the mattress, and she was methodically folding sweaters and placing them inside. She was wearing a heavy cashmere cardigan, and her eyes were red, but the frantic panic energy from the night before was gone. She just looked defeated. I stood in the doorway. She stopped folding a sweater and looked up at me. Bastian called me, I said. I know, she said quietly. He called me back this morning. He told me what you said about the DocuSign. Were you going to tell him the truth, or were you just going to let him drain his retirement account to cover your felony? Isabel looked down at the suitcase. I just wanted the pressure to stop. I thought if he paid the $200,000, Fairfax would go away, and we could just start over. I would pay my dad back. Eventually, start over, I repeated. The phrase tasted like ash. You lied to your father. You forged my name. You stole my company's credit. You jeopardized the roof over our heads, and your solution is to have someone else write a check so you don't have to face the consequences. She dropped the sweater into the suitcase. I'm leaving. That's what you want, right? You can't even look at me. I'm going to stay at Sloane Calloway's guest house for a few days, just until things cool down. Sloane Calloway, I said, remembering the influencer she had paid $5,000 to attend her launch party. Does Sloane know you're completely insolvent? She's a friend, Isabel said defensively. She's a paid contractor who drank your champagne, I corrected her. But go ahead. If you think she's going to let you sleep on her couch when you have nothing left to offer her brand, you go find out. I turned away from the door and walked down the hall to my home office. I walked in, shut the door, and locked it. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I didn't care that she was leaving. In fact, it was a relief. I didn't want to manage her emotions while I dismantled the people who had tried to ruin me. I opened a new, encrypted folder on my desktop. I named it Vanguard/Fairfax. I started pulling the files together. First, the PDF of the forged commercial lease. Second, the digital screenshot of the DocuSign IP log, proving the signature came from a residential router, not a business IP. Third, the photo of Sullivan's freight manifest. Fourth, the paid invoices from Soren Drent, clearly listing my LLC as the purchaser of the textiles. Fifth, the 32 time-stamped photos from Griffin Keating's foreman. I spent 2 hours organizing the files, labeling them clearly, creating a sequential timeline of events. I built a PDF dossier that read less like a legal complaint and more like a forensic audit. It mapped out exactly how Declan Fairfax and Delaney Wyndham were colluding to manufacture defaults, extort personal guarantors, and steal commercial inventory to fund Wyndham's office expansion. At 4 p.m., I picked up my phone and called Whitmore. I have the photos, I told him when he answered. You got the contractor to let you in? Whitmore sounded genuinely surprised. I got the contractor to sell me his foreman's liability documentation, I said. Timestamp, high res. The custom tags on the furniture are visible. They match the supply invoices I paid. Whitmore let out a low whistle. Incredible. You have them. So, what's the play? We file for an emergency injunction tomorrow morning? No, I said. If we file an injunction, Fairfax's lawyers tie us up in court for months. Wyndham moves the furniture out the back door, destroys the tags, and claims ignorance. I don't want to fight them in a courtroom, Whitmore. I want to crush them in a boardroom. Explain. You said Vanguard Properties in Chicago owns the building. Fairfax is just the property manager skimming the default. Correct. Vanguard is a massive private equity firm. They own dozens of commercial high-rises. Private equity firms hate liability, I said, staring at my computer screen. And they hate rogue property managers exposing them to multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracies. If Fairfax executes the lien against my house tomorrow, he's committing wire fraud, extortion, and conversion of property on Vanguard's behalf. Vanguard becomes the primary beneficiary of a felony. They wouldn't tolerate that risk, Whitmore agreed, his voice sharpening with professional excitement. If you can prove their regional manager is running a grift that exposes the holding company to federal RICO statutes, Vanguard's compliance officers will execute Fairfax before lunch. I need the contact information for Vanguard's chief compliance officer and their head of West Coast real estate. Direct email address, not the public info portal. Give me 10 minutes, Whitmore said. I'll pull their corporate directory. I hung up and started drafting the email. I didn't write it like an angry victim. I wrote it like a logistics auditor reporting a critical supply chain failure. I kept the language clinical, precise, and entirely devoid of emotion. 2. Vanguard Properties corporate compliance / head of commercial real estate subject. Urgent criminal liability exposure via Declan Fairfax Commercial Management. To whom it may concern, I am the registered owner of Holt Supply Logistics, LLC. I am writing to formally notify Vanguard Properties of an active, ongoing criminal conspiracy being executed by your regional property manager, Declan Fairfax, within your Portland commercial asset. Fairfax is currently colluding with a 6th-floor tenant, the Wyndham Agents, to manufacture fraudulent lease defaults on lower-floor retail tenants. This is a closed-loop extortion scheme designed to trigger personal guarantee, allowing Fairfax to privately skim 6-figure settlements while illegally transferring seized commercial inventory to furnish Wyndham's office expansion. Attached is a forensic dossier containing 1. Photographic proof of an illegal, off-the-books freight transfer authorized by Fairfax. 2. Timestamped, high-resolution photographs of stolen commercial inventory currently residing in Suite 600. 3. Paid supply invoices proving my LLC legally owns the raw materials currently in Wyndham's possession. 4. Written communication from Fairfax attempting to extort $200,000 from me by 9:00 a.m. Monday, based on a forged DocuSign lease guarantee. If Fairfax proceeds with filing the lien against my family trust tomorrow morning, Vanguard Properties will be officially documented as the primary beneficiary of wire fraud, grand larceny, and corporate extortion. I will immediately turn this dossier over to the Multnomah County District Attorney, the State Attorney General, and the local commercial real estate press. I require immediate written confirmation that the lease for Suite 402 is voided, the forged personal guarantee is nullified, and my stolen commercial property will be released from Suite 600. You have until 8:00 a.m. Pacific time tomorrow to resolve this internally before I take it public. I read the email 3 times. It was a loaded gun pointed directly at Chicago. My phone chimed. It was a text from Whitmore containing 2 direct email addresses for Vanguard's corporate executives. I copied the addresses into the recipient line. Then, I added 2 more addresses to the CC line. Declan.Fairfax@fairfaxcommercial.com, Delaney@wyndhamagency.com. I wanted them to watch the missile drop. I wanted them to know exactly who pulled the trigger. I attached the encrypted PDF dossier. I hovered my mouse over the send button. The house was completely silent. Isabel was gone. The marriage was functionally over. I was sitting in a dark office on a Sunday evening, staring down the barrel of a $300,000 debt that wasn't mine. I clicked send. Monday morning, at 7:42 a.m., my phone rang. An unfamiliar Chicago area code. Mr. Voss, this is Patricia Renner, Senior Vice President of Asset Compliance for Vanguard Property. Her voice was crisp, professional, and carefully devoid of warmth. I'm calling to inform you that as of 6 o'clock this morning, Declan Fairfax's management contract has been terminated, effective immediately. We've placed an interim manager at the property who will be reaching out to formally void the Suite 402 lease and the associated guarantee. We consider this matter closed on our end. And Suite 600? I asked. Wyndham Agency's lease is also under review, Renner said, the words clipped. Any property identified as belonging to your LLC will be released to you by end of business today, pending verification of your invoices. I trust that's satisfactory. It was more than satisfactory. It was a corporation moving at the speed of pure self-preservation, scrubbing a liability before it could metastasize into a headline. One more thing, she added. We'd appreciate it if the materials you sent didn't find their way to the press. Vanguard takes tenant fraud very seriously and will be cooperating fully with any investigation. Translation, bury it, and we'll make sure Fairfax never works in commercial property management again. I could live with that. I didn't need a headline. I needed my house, and I needed my warehouse left alone. By Wednesday, the velvet sectionals and the teak credenzas were sitting back in my Beaverton warehouse, smelling faintly of someone else's drywall dust. I sold the lot to a liquidator in Seattle for $11,000, a fraction of what they were worth, but cash I could put directly against Isabel's debt to Soren. Soren and I are still doing business. It took one long, uncomfortable lunch and a written guarantee that no application would ever again be filed under my company's name without my signature in person. He didn't apologize, and I didn't ask him to. We're not friends. We're vendors who trust each other again, which in this business is worth more. Isabel didn't go to Sloane's guest house. She lasted 4 days before Sloane's assistant texted her a polite, brand-safe message asking her to find alternative accommodation. She's staying with her parents in Scottsdale now. Bastian, to his credit, didn't write any checks. He hired a forensic accountant instead, which I suspect Isabel finds far less comforting than a wire transfer. The divorce filing came through my mailbox on a Thursday. I signed it at the kitchen island, the same one where she'd announced her need for absolute autonomy 4 months earlier. I didn't need a lawyer to tell me what was fair. I kept the warehouse, the LLC, the trucks in the house, unencumbered, the lien long since a dead letter. She kept her name, her Instagram following, and whatever was left of the Elevate and Scale alumni network, most of whom, I later heard, had stories of their own about Odette Sorrell. I never did hear what happened to Odette. Whitmore said a few other dossiers like mine had quietly made their way to a few other compliance departments around the same time. Funny how that happens when you stop being the only person someone's been grifting. The showroom downtown sat empty for about 6 weeks before a new tenant moved in, a coffee roaster, this time, with a 5-year lease, and I'd bet, a guarantor who actually read Clause 14. I still work out of Beaverton. Steel shelving, unrefinished credenzas, a corrugated metal roof that leaks a little when it rains. It still smells like sawdust and engine oil. It still smells like a business that's actually mine.